The surpassed profound and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it here to receive and uphold it, vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings. Let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. We haven't studied Surangama Sutra for the past few days, so today let us resume our class on the Surangama Sutra. In the Surangama Sutra, we had already studied that Venerable Purna asked questions to Shakyamuni Buddha. According to some commentaries, there are 4 main questions he posed to the Buddha. These are the 4 main questions addressed in this chapter, and one of the most important questions is that where does the ignorance come from? The Buddha replied by giving the example of a mad person and asked Venerable Purna, where is the source and the beginning of this deluded mind, of this insane mind? And then Ananda also asked the question to the Buddha. You probably remember that Ananda asked, since the Buddha had already taught on how everything is a production of causes and conditions, which is quite reasonable, because Venerable Ananda himself, as well as Shariputra, Madhgalayana, and Shupati, and a great numbers of the noble ones had attained realization because of the teachings on causes and conditions. And that's how the ignorance ceased for them and attained the noble fruition through the wisdom. But now Ananda got quite confused, saying that you're saying that it is not of causes and conditions, it is not of production of causes and conditions, nor of spontaneity, which doesn't seem to be quite reasonable. And then the Buddha continued to give the example of Yajnadatta, which is quite a special person, saying that through this example, the Buddha taught that it is simply saying that the causes and conditions and the production of spontaneity are conceptual elaborations. Let's continue to look at the Buddha's explanation. He now says that is why I say that the 3 conditions ceasing to be is itself the Bodhi mind. The Buddha then addressed Ananda, saying that through the example of Yajnadatta, in fact, all of those insanity are completely deluded and confused. There is no beginning and no end. It is simply a conceptual elaboration. So now I'm speaking of the ceasing of the 3 conditions. From a vast point of view, we can say that the causes and conditions of animated and inanimate world, as well as causes and fruitions. But over here, the 3 conditions refers to killing, stealing, and lust. These 3 conditions ceasing could lead to the recognition of his true nature, including killing, stealing, and lust, can be of no abandoning and no accepting, no adapting. After eradicated such, then the true bodhicitta would be able to naturally manifest. And this bodhicitta is not a production of spontaneity. It is not a production that has production or cessation. It is not of spontaneity. It is not a production of causes and conditions. It is the most profound and ultimate bodhicitta. But Ananda thinks that it is not reasonable because he attained realization through the teaching of causes and how everything is a production of causes and conditions. And he doesn't agree that the production from spontaneity is correct because that is no other than the heretic's teaching. But then the Buddha continued to explain that the production through causes and condition or of spontaneity, or considering that there are something constantly existing in conventional truth, those are simply conventional. But in the ultimate truth, both of spontaneity and causes and conditions are simply conceptual elaborations. And then the Buddha continued to say that the Bodhi mind being produced and the mind subject to production and extinctions being extinguished is simply production and extinction. Over here, the teaching is that the Bodhi mind is not a product of causes and conditions. The true Bodhi mind is devoid of production and cessation. The true Bodhi mind does not have production nor cessation. The production and the cessation are comparative, or they are of each other's reference. There is no true production and cessation. There is simply of a convention. So the ending of both production and extinction is the effortless way. The production and the cessation has already ceased or extinguished. Or you can say that both of them have been purified. That is the true effortless path. According to some commentary, it says that that which is surpassed of all, or in another word, that can devoid of all speech and thoughts, is what we would call as the great samadhi of Surangama, the great Surangama Samadhi, the most ultimate realization and insight. So Ananda, if you think that it is simply of a production of causes and condition, then such kind of production and cessation are simply based on your deluded conceptual mind, and it is of a confusion. And then the Buddha says that if there is spontaneity, then clearly it must be that the thought of spontaneity arises and the mind subject to production and extinction ceases. That then is still production and extinction. If you agree to what the heretics proclaims, that it is simply a production of spontaneity, what does that sound? Over here, it points out that if there is a production of spontaneity, that would be very clear. Then we would know that there is the production of the spontaneity mind. And if this spontaneity mind is existent, then the mind of production and cessation should be seized. This mind of production and cessation is no longer of effortless path. So this is also part of production and cessation. It is also a mind of production and cessation. But the Bodhi mind, if you were to say that this natural Bodhi mind is the cessation of the production and cessation mind, in fact, you are still saying that this mind that is of production and cessation is of the Dharma of production and cessation, is subject to the production and cessation. It is not of spontaneity. Because you're saying that this mind that has production and cessation, after it ceases, then the mind would naturally appear. In this way, it is also not effortless. The very definition of nature is that it is without production and without cessation. Now let's look at nature and not nature. Over here it says that if there is spontaneity, then clearly it must be that the thought of spontaneity arises and the mind subject to production and extinction ceases. That then is still production and cessation. To call the lack of production and extinction spontaneity is the same as to say that the single substance formed by the combination of all mundane appearance is a mixed and united essence, and that whatever is not mixed and united is basically spontaneous in nature. From the worldly sense, even the worldly beings would consider that the two things being mixed together, two or more than two things being mixed together, is called uniting. It is not nature. It is to put milk and water together, milk and tea together, it is called milk tea, and then to add a bit more of butter, then it's butter tea. It is a few different things adding together, combining together is called uniting, and that is not nature. But the ones that is not united, that is called nature. For example, some very natural rocks, maybe stones, according to the worldly studies, the so-called natural substance could have lots of other substance that's mixed in there as well. For example, to geology, according to geology, each of the substance are mixed with other substance. But what is considered as natural to geology is that as long as it is not man-made, then that is called natural. In our terms, we call that our mind is natural or nature. We call it a natural, it is clear, it is open, it is direct and luminous. We kept on using those kinds of terms to call it. In Dzogchen especially, the clear nature, the open, direct nature, the luminous nature, the naked nature. There are lots of descriptions to describe such kind of nature of it. The nature that we're discussing is without production, without extinction. The worldly beings would also agree that there are the things that's natural and the things that's not natural. And now we're going to further discuss that the kinds of dharma that is without conceptual elaboration, it is without any uniting and mixing or natural production, that is the dharma that is without conceptual elaborations. Previously, we talked about that, Ananda, everything that you would claim that they're existent, in fact, are of conceptual elaborations, including what you consider as spontaneity of natural, are considered as conceptual elaborations. Even the teachings of causes and conditions are also conceptual elaborations, because as long as there are extremes, they are considered as conceptual elaborations. We had studied the fundamental wisdom of Madhyamika and the ornament of Madhyamika, which are quite helpful to understand the Surangama Sutra. Lots of those teachings and inference that we studied in those books could help us to recognize that there is no solid existent dharma within this world. In the ornament of Madhyamika, Mipa Rinpoche kept on emphasizing on that. I've taught the ornaments of Madhyamika for how many years? Almost 20 years. I taught that back in 2005. Well, time passed by so quickly and life is indeed quite short. Now let's look at what is without conceptual elaboration. When the spontaneity is devoid of spontaneity and mixing and uniting are devoid of their unifying quality, so that spontaneity and unity alike are abandoned, and both the abandonment of them and their existence cease to be, that is no idle theory. There is no conceptual elaboration. Well, without the foundations of Madhyamika and Vajrayana teachings, I don't know if people would be able to understand Surangama Sutra, and it could be very difficult to expound the Surangama Sutra. Maybe it's exactly for that reason not many people are teaching the Surangama Sutra. So I really hope that those of you, after completing the studies of Surangama Sutra, you can propagate this teaching, to spread this teaching to more and more people, because I believe many of you are capable of doing so, since we have already studied the Madhyamika studies and the Buddhist logic studies, as well as Mahayati. Then the content within the Surangama Sutra would be a bit easier for you to explain, and the wordings are beautiful. Sometimes it could get a little difficult. However, without those foundations, you will have a difficult time to understand what it means. Over here, the Buddha says that when spontaneity is devoid of spontaneity and mixing and uniting are devoid of their unifying quality, it is to say that the spontaneity is also conceptual elaboration, because there is no dharma that is spontaneous, can be truly established as a solid existent entity. There is no constant existence, nor of the nihilistic. There is no truly solid existent dharma. So the so-called spontaneity, once you look into the nature, you will be able to see that it is of not spontaneity. Similarly, applying to the uniting and mixing, if there is the uniting and mixing of causes and conditions, that is simply your point of view without truly making observation of each of the aspects of it. Otherwise, there is no uniting and mixing either. How could you say that there is mixing and uniting? Is it of one entity after uniting and mixing, or is it of other entities? Is it touching, or is it without touching? So the uniting and mixing is of conceptual elaboration, and it is not uniting and mixing, because there is really nothing to unite and mix either. For example, when we make the observation of the butter tea, how could you mix the nature of the butter and the nature of the tea and the nature of the water all together? If you make such observation, there is no uniting and mixing. The uniting and mixing is not valid, neither does spontaneity. These two already parted from the actual nature. So other than these two, is there another existence, another dharma that is existent? It is not either. The uniting and mixing, as well as the spontaneity being together, is there something that is the combination of both? There is not either. So whenever we talk about the neither existent nor non-existent, neither two nor not two, we're talking about parting from the four extremes and the 8 types of elaborations. After making such refutation of the 4 extremes, how could we find anything that can be existent in such a way? If we were to come to a conclusion that something is existent, then it has to have the existence in the way that it is existent, or it is not existent, or it is neither or both. Since we have already refuted the 4 extremes, then how could there be an existence? The Chinese, in the Chinese commentary, there are the Chinese ways of explaining and refutation of those kinds of existence as well. There are different explanations. And then Ananda's question, to address Ananda's question, the Buddha gives the answer gives such an answer because Ananda kept on thinking that there is a production or there is the type of existence based on causes and conditions or of spontaneity. But when we make the observation, they are simply all conceptual elaborations. It is of not uniting and mixing, or not mixing and uniting, not the both and nor neither. And then the same applies to spontaneity. So whenever you make such kinds of observation, you'll be able to see that the nature is simply devoid of conceptual elaboration. It is simply expounded in such a way through speech or through our language. That is why, according to the Sacred Speech Sutra, Mahayana Sacred Speech Sutra, it says that the insight that is the inner realization surpass that of all the descriptions of language. Because the realization of such nature is devoid of the 4 extremes and 8 kinds of elaborations. And such kind of realization cannot be expounded and expressed through language. It could only be pointed to and to be represented. And then the Buddha is about to scold Venerable Ananda again. Over here, I would like to especially address to our staff members. I think it's quite crucial for our staff member to work with their temper. Do not think having a quick temper is a merit. Do not get so aggressive just because of other people's criticism. This is not very good. In a variety of situations, I've noticed a few numbers of our staff members tend to be quite arrogant. I would like to remind you the reason you're staffing for the Sangha is because you want to serve the Sangha. You should be able to work with your mindset, your mentality. Do not run out of patience. You need to develop some kinds of patience. Otherwise, it would be difficult to work with the others. If you were to argue with this one today and argue with that one tomorrow, then your particular behavior is not quite dignified to this Sangha over here. Other people would feel that, what is your practice? Why can't you even tame your mind? So don't get so irritable. This is something that you need to remember. Look at Ananda, for example. The Buddha, though, started to criticize him in front of such a large group of people, but look at how he would react. Ananda never get angry with him. The Buddha over here says that Bodhi and Nirvana are still so far away that you must undoubtedly pass through kalpas of bitterness and diligence before you cultivate them and are certified. So to Ananda, this Bodhi, the fruition of Nirvana, is still so far away. The Buddha said that, well, the questions you ask are so irrelevant. You can't even ask the questions that is directly hitting the key points. So the Buddha says that the Bodhi and Nirvana is still so far away for you. And then he continued to say that you must undoubtedly pass through kalpas of bitterness and diligence before you cultivate them and are certified. You can hold in memory the 12 divisions of the sutras spoken by the Buddhas of the 10 directions and their pure, wonderful principles, as many as the sands of the river Ganges, but it only aids your idle theorizing. The Buddha says that though that you have studied and listened to so many teachings, and though that you have this memory dharani, this dharani of upholding those memories and recitations of those sutras that's taught by the Buddhas of the 10 directions, the 12 categories of the sutras. All of those profound, vast, and pure teachings can be memorized by you clearly. And those teachings are just as many as the sands of River Ganges. However, those are not of benefit to you because those are simply conceptual elaborations to you. Many of you who are here, though that your study and contemplation are very good, but if you do not practice well, then you will be like Ananda for lifetimes. Maybe it is very much because of his habitual tendencies. He had been the kinds of scholars for lifetimes. And since he is the foremost in study and listening, though that he is quite prolific in such a way, his practice is not up to par. Just like some of you who can speak well but don't really know how to put them into their actual actions. Nowadays, we have so many talkers, but we don't have lots of doers. There are people who can make everyone really happy by their language, but their actions cannot match their speech. So the Buddha says to Ananda that though that you can remember the 12 categories of sutras, you're so prolific in such a way, and you can remember them so clearly, and you can memorize the sutras numbering the sands of Ganges River. But you don't have very good realization. This is quite crucial to all of us who are studying and contemplating. Compared to Ananda, I think many of us did not get ordained at a young age, and we have lots of habitual tendencies carrying through our worldly life. Though that we have a few years of study, contemplation, and practice, but this is really not quite prolific study and contemplation. Do not get so arrogant with it. Maybe you think that, oh, I've studied some of the sutras and shastras, but compared to the vast wisdom of the Buddha, look at the Tripitaka, the Tibetan Tripitaka that has 108 volumes. We probably studied less than 8. There are still 100 volumes there that we haven't studied. And the Buddha's wisdom are still in the storage of the scriptures of the Buddha's wisdom are still currently stored in the Naga's palace in the celestial realm, which far surpass in numbers than the ones that's kept in human realm in the Tibetan Tripitaka or the Chinese Tripitaka. We are not considered as prolific in such a way. So over here, the Buddha is not quite satisfied with Ananda's insights, saying that though they are very good at reciting those sutras, but since you have no realization, then whatever you speak of are conceptual elaborations. The Buddha says you can discuss causes and conditions and spontaneity and understand them perfectly clearly, and people in the world refer to you as one of the foremost in learning. The Buddha says that, well, you can understand these kinds of causes and conditions. You can talk about the co-emergent causes similar to its results, and all of those terms. And when it comes to the spontaneity, let it be a constant spontaneity, the spontaneity that is unchanging, you can speak very well of it. And people would revere you as the foremost in learning. Ananda indeed is considered as one of the 10 great disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha. He is of the foremost in learning. He is also quite diligent. In this way, we should definitely look up to him in such an aspect. But the Buddha scolded him for the reason that Ananda does not have any insights. And then the Buddha continued to say that you spend You've spent aeons upon aeons saturating yourself with learning, yet you could not avoid the difficulty of Matangi. Remember the Matangi woman? Though that you've studied for lifetimes and listened so many, though that you have such kinds of habitual tendencies, we also have class after class, day by day, and reading the sutras and shastras day by day. We don't really know what our past lives are, but in this lifetime, we've been studying a lot. But whenever you encounter something, some situations are presented to you, though that you listened a lot, but you cannot go through the difficulty situations such as encountering the Matangi woman. You have no samadhi at all. So in front of those obstacles and afflictions, that is how you faced it without real insights. And then the Buddha continued to say that, why did you have to wait for me to use the spiritual mantra of the Buddha summit? The fire of lust in Matangi's daughter's heart died instantly, and she attained the position of the anagami, which is the fruition of no returning. Now she is one of a vigorous group in my Dharma assembly. Some of the Chinese commentary depicted this vigorous group or this diligent practice within the Dharma assembly as a forest. There are lots of monastics practicing meditation within the forest, but maybe because my eyes doesn't perform well nowadays, I can't really recognize which one is the Matangi woman and how her diligence is depicted. In the Tibetan version, it didn't really say the vigorous practice of the Matangi woman, but stated that she succeeded in diligence. And then over here, the Buddha says that now she is one of the vigorous group in my Dharma assembly. The river of love dried up in her, and she was able to set you free. At the beginning of the Surangama Sutra, we studied the Sutra of the Matangi woman. Also, there's another translation called the Year of Tiger Sutra, where it talked about the Matangi woman had severe lust towards Ananda. Let it be sitting or walking, she kept on thinking of Ananda, even in her dreams and in reality, and all of her fantasies are all about Ananda. Other than that, she couldn't think of anything. So her river of lust was flooding, and that really burned her mind stream. Ananda, with all of the prolific learnings of the wisdom, couldn't really work with such kinds of lust. It is only by using the Surangama mantra the Buddha was able to eradicate such obstacle for Ananda. Mantra also means that which eradicates obstacles, according to the commentary of holding the palms. So this time, by chanting mantras and the 7-line prayer, through those kinds of practice, I believe many of you gained certain insights through your practice. Each year during the retreat time, I usually get quite busy. But this time, I got some time to engage in practice. And I think retreats are so essential because in the other times, you don't really have such kinds of sufficient time to engage in the actual practice. We usually need to study and listen to classes as well as serve the Sangha, or sometimes I need to attend lots of meetings, so on and so forth. But this time I used the majority of the time to practice bodhicitta and all kinds of practices. We need to put an emphasis on the actual practice. Of course, we can't be too extreme with those. We need to still maintain a balance. For example, I've heard that there are people who's talking about getting their enlightened insights validified. And I don't even dare to say that I can get my insights validified. I think this kinds of actions really shows certain types of imbalance. We all have very different insights. Some tend to be quite diligent, some tend to be very good at practice, and some at listening and studying. But we need to maintain a sense of balance, and we need to pay attention to what other people are doing. This is quite crucial. Anyhow, over here, Ananda, by the blessings of the Buddha, had already attained the fruition of no return. The fruition of no return. And then the Buddha directly pointed out to Ananda, saying that, well, if she hasn't attained this fruition of no return, then she would be here to bother you every day. Wouldn't you be suffering a lot? The Buddha then says that, well, since your practice is not up to par, the Buddha particularly mentions that your practice is not up to par within the whole Sangha. Ananda, initially within the whole Sangha, is quite well respected, but the Buddha took out his weak points and specifically mentions this to sprinkle some salt on his wound. And then the Buddha continued to say that, therefore, Ananda, your ability to keep in mind the thus come one's wonderful sacred teachings of aeons after aeons is not as good as a single day of no outflow cultivation that is intent upon getting far away from the two worldly sufferings of love and hate. The Buddha states that for aeons and aeons, you've already upheld the teachings of the Tathagatas. That is sacred, that is profound, that is vast, that is unfathomable. Such kinds of wonderful and subtle dharmas that's being accumulated for the numerous aeons. Though that you can remember all of them, they are still not comparable to the genuine practice of a no outflow, which is the true emptiness. This teaching is very much applied to us. Each day we would engage in the group practice before the actual class and after the class. If during the time of practicing such, you can truly use it, that would be wonderful. If you can't, if you don't have any insight, then chanting mantras, Om Banda Sadahom, and so on and so forth, is just listening to it again and again. It is not of any changes in your own mind stream. So over here, the Buddha says that upholding all of those wonderful teachings of the Thus Come One is not comparable to engaging actual practice in one day. And after the actual practice, one would definitely be able to part from the worldly love and hates. And then the greed and aggression would not be able to bring you any suffering. If you were to develop some genuine practice insights, then the love and hate are not going to create any harm to you. I believe Master Nanhuai once stated that the bliss of meditation far surpasses that of the contaminated love of the worldly men and women. According to the Vinaya Sutra, it says that the worldly bliss of the five desires, or the bliss of the various celestial realms, cannot compare to the cessation of love. Such kinds of happiness of the five desires of the worldly realms or the celestial realms is less significant than the 1,000th compared to the cessation of love. This teaching is very similar to the letter to a friend. The worldly people would think that the love and relationship are really happy, and the worldly people constantly think that love is so great. Yes, it is great. It is also a source of great suffering as well. It is probably the biggest source to bring suffering within the human realm. It does bring happiness, but compared to the suffering, it is really insignificant. So the true happiness is through meditation and through the recognition of your nature. Through such kind of practice, then you will be able to see that all of those kinds of contaminated love, the worldly love, are of no intrinsic value or meaning. And then there is an example the Buddha tells Ananda to advise him to engage in actual practice to further demonstrate that your prolific studies is not up to par to a single day of practice. The Buddha over here says that in Matangi's daughter, a former prostitute, love and desire were dispelled by the spiritual power of the mantra. Now her name in Dharma is Bhikshuni nature. Now, the Matangi's daughter had accumulated lifetimes of habitual tendencies of lust. Because of such embedded habitual tendencies, though being a Brahmin woman, she had also became a former prostitute. But because of the power of the mantra of the Buddha and her own diligence, all of the lust had come to an end, had ceased. That is why she is named as Bhikshuni nature. Her name has not been changed. Now she has become such a tamed Bhikshuni. And after she attained such realization, she doesn't even talk to Ananda anymore because she has a great level of realization now, unlike how she was before. She used to follow Ananda to the males sector of the Dharma assembly, and she would hold on to Ananda. But then later, since she has already recognized the nature of love and lust, after recognizing it, she became a bhikshuni. This is the first example. The next one is that the mother of Rahula, just like how some of our lay practitioners would say that, oh, this is the father of my child, this is the mother of my child. So the Buddha says that she and Rahula's mother, Yashodhara, both became aware of their past causes and knew that for many kalpas they had endured the suffering of greed and love. In the past life, when Prince Siddhartha and the Brahmin woman made the aspiration, she made the aspiration that she would not become the obstacle on his path of the Bodhi. And he made flower offering in front of Buddha Dipikara. Yashodhara had come to the realization of her past life and for lifetimes endured great numbers of suffering because of love. For that reason, she started to engage in the actual practice and then received the prediction of enlightenment through the Buddha. Because they single-mindedly became permeated with the cultivation of the goodness of no outflow, they were both freed from their bonds and received predictions. The Matangi's daughter attained the fruition of no return and unfettered from the webs of afflictions. The Matangi's daughter, I think according to Avatamsaka Sutra, stated that there is the prediction from the from a Buddha that she will become the Tathagata that is endowed with thousands and tens of thousands of light form Buddha. So in the future, she will also become the Tathagata, and same as Yashodhara. Through practice, we can see that the two women had truly transformed. One attained the fruition of no return, the other one has the future prediction of attaining the Buddhahood. So, to make the comparison, the Matangi woman had lots of afflictions at the beginning and brought about lots of troubles to Ananda. The group of people around, the group of people of the Sangha also felt that it was quite terrifying. Yashodhara, though, that through the biography, we didn't really see that she had lots of such severe habitual tendencies, but indeed, those habitual tendencies did pass down. It is only after encountering the Buddha's teaching, their mind stream will be able to be transformed. The biography of Yeshe Tsogyal states that Yeshe Tsogyal was considered a very special woman. Ever since a very young age, she was really beautiful. Lots of princes showed affections to her, and in order to have her, small countries engaged in war to fight over her. And then Tritsum Ditsen eventually made her a consort. And then at that time, though, that she's really beautiful, but she placed the more importance on the Dharma. After Padmasambhava enters into Tibet, King Tritsum Ditsen offered her to Padmasambhava as a consort. And then Padmasambhava give the teachings to her, and she is not an ordinary woman. She doesn't have afflictions. And more importantly, she was able to uphold the teachings of Padmasambhava, as well as all the teachings that she was able to remember all of the teachings of Padmasambhava through her memory dharani. She then later bestowed those teachings to the 8 classes of Nagas and also protectors. She remembered, recorded, memorized those precious teachings, such as the Dharma teachings, and then bestowed those to the protectors, and then stated Samaya at the end of it. We can see those kinds of teachings in her biography, especially when she engaged in those special austerity practices in caves. In the autobiography of Sarah Kondro, we can see that though she appeared to have lots of afflictions that's similar to ordinary women, for a few times she had the intention to commit suicide and she lost the confidence in herself. But she has one particular characteristic, which is she had a great reverence to all of the great teachers, including the Tsema Toku as well as Garner Tatung. All of those kinds of teachings were spreaded by her and propagated by her. Within the women practitioners, including Mandarava Kondroma, she's also a great practitioner. She was a princess of a king, but she had a great memory. So when it comes to the spreading of the Dharma, if some ordinary women with great afflictions, which could bring about great obstacles in the spreading of Dharma, these wonderful female practitioners had such subtle and detailed wisdom that could remember those teachings and pass down those teachings. On top of that, they do not have jealousy like the ordinary people and do not have the crooked mind. When I visited Harvard and attended a class of the biography of Yeshe Tokyo Kondroma, there was a teacher that was talking about the particular incidents where Yeshe Tokyo was raped by a few people, and after she was raped, she liberated those people who raped her. And then the professor gave an example of how ordinary people would react in those kinds of situations. And compared to the ordinary people's reaction, we can see that Yeshe Tokyo generated a great compassion, also liberated those people, which is extremely different than the ordinary women. Let it be men or women, there are lots of people who attended liberation and made a great contribution to the spreading of the Dharma. There are lots of women in our time who are considered quite extraordinary. For example, look at the queen who just passed away. During her 70 years of reigning, she worked with 15 prime ministers. We are looking at these female practitioners, looking at the Matangi's daughter and Yashodhara. All of those women are so great. And then the Buddha said that, why then do you cheat yourself and still remain caught up in looking and listening, in reading and listening? Why are you still cheating yourself by only studying theories? Look at those women who had a lot more of afflictions than you did before, now had already attained realization. How is it that you can't even attain the realization of no return? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Master Oyi, according to his explanation, he stated that the practice of the Dharma of no flow is crucial. Without practicing in such a way, it is not meaningful to study vastly. But of course, without listening or not listening to the Dharma is even worse. It is even more meaningless. But look at Ananda compared to the actual practitioner, such as the Matangi's daughter. They had such big difference now. At the beginning, Matangi's daughter were practicing the heretics' teaching, and even this kind of woman who had lots of afflictions and the heretics' teaching had attained this fruition of no return. And Ananda, although that you are so prolific in listening, but your practice is not good. So over here it mentions that let it be men or women, whomsoever. It is crucial for us to study and contemplate and be prolific in such a way, but what's more important is to engage in actual practice. This particular retreat that we just had, I think most of you did quite well, though a small number of you didn't really get up in the early morning to practice in the first session because I don't see the lights on, or maybe because you can memorize all the chantings. I don't know. Well, let's stop here today.
Zhe ben zhou len zhou ai zhou ai zhou